The Emperor's Decision Matrix. Every day, Marcus Aurelius made decisions that affected $400 billion in annual revenue and 60 million lives. One wrong choice could collapse the empire, start wars, or destroy entire economies. Yet, historical records show he never suffered from decision paralysis, never second-guessed himself, and never lost sleep over major choices. His secret wasn't superhuman confidence. It was a decision-making framework so powerful that modern CEOs pay $50,000 just to learn simplified versions of it. Jeff Bezos uses this exact system for Amazon's biggest bets. When he decided to expand beyond books into everything, when he chose to build Amazon Web Services, when he committed billions to space exploration through Blue Origin, he was applying principles that Marcus Aurelius perfected 19 centuries ago. Warren Buffett credits it for his best investments. Every major acquisition, every market timing decision, every strategic pivot at Berkshire Hathaway flows through a decision matrix that mirrors the Emperor's approach. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater's entire investment philosophy around these principles. His famous Principles book is essentially a modern translation of Marcus Aurelius' decision-making methodology. Tim Cook used this framework to navigate Apple through the post-Jobs transition, making choices that preserved the company's culture while driving unprecedented growth. Naval Ravikant applies these same concepts to its angel investing, systematically evaluating startups using criteria that would be familiar to a Roman emperor. But here's what most people don't understand about this framework. It's not just a business tool. It's a complete system for navigating uncertainty, managing complexity, and making optimal choices under pressure. Marcus didn't develop this for boardroom meetings or quarterly planning sessions. He created it for life and death decisions in the middle of plagues, wars, and political upheavals. The framework works because it's based on fundamental truths about human psychology and decision-making that haven't changed in 2,000 years. We still face the same cognitive biases, emotional pressures, and information overload that challenged ancient leaders. The stakes might be different, but the underlying structure of choice remains constant. By the end of this masterclass, you'll have the complete Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix, the same framework that guided the most successful leader in human history through impossible choices. More importantly, you'll understand how to adapt it to your specific challenges, whether you're running a startup, managing a Fortune 500 company, or building a personal empire from scratch. Picture this. It's dawn in the year 170 A.D. Marcus Aurelius sits in his tent on the Germanic frontier, facing a decision that will determine the fate of the Roman Empire. Barbarian tribes have crossed the Danube River, threatening to overrun the wealthiest provinces in Europe. His generals demand immediate military action. His advisors warn that war will cost the equivalent of $50 billion and thousands of lives. His citizens expect protection. His enemies smell weakness. The pressure is unimaginable. Every minute of delay could mean more territory lost, more civilians killed, more wealth destroyed. His military commanders are experienced warriors who've never lost a major battle. They're telling him that hesitation equals defeat, His political advisors are warning that any sign of weakness will encourage other barbarian tribes to attack. His economic counselors are calculating the devastating cost of prolonged warfare. But Marcus also knows that hasty decisions in crisis situations often create bigger problems than the original crisis itself. He's seen other leaders make emotional choices under pressure that seemed right in the moment, but proved disastrous in hindsight. He studied the history of empires that fell not because they lacked strength, but because they made poor strategic decisions when facing challenges. Most leaders would panic. Most would make emotional decisions driven by fear, anger, or political pressure. The weight of 60 million lives and 4 centuries of Roman civilization would crush their judgment. They would either rush into battle to appear strong or hesitate so long that the opportunity for effective action would pass. Marcus did something different. He pulled out a small leather journal and began working through a systematic process that had never failed him. This wasn't procrastination or indecision. This was methodical analysis designed to find the optimal solution in minimal time. He had trained his mind to work through complex decisions systematically, even under extreme pressure. Within an hour, he had his answer. Not just any answer, but the optimal decision that would save the empire, minimize casualties, and strengthen Rome for the next century. He would fight, but not immediately. He would negotiate first, but from a position of strength. He would prepare for war while pursuing peace, creating multiple pathways to success. The decision proved brilliant. Marcus's measured response allowed him to divide the barbarian coalition, turning some tribes into allies while isolating the most aggressive ones. When fighting did occur, it was on terms favorable to Rome, with clear objectives and minimal cost. The campaign that could have bankrupted the empire instead strengthened it, establishing buffer zones that protected Roman territory for generations. This wasn't luck. This wasn't intuition. This was the most sophisticated decision-making system ever developed, refined through 20 years of leading the world's largest organization. Today, you're going to learn exactly how it works. More importantly, you're going to understand how to apply it to the complex decisions you face in building your own empire. The weight of imperial decisions was unlike anything in human history. Every morning, Marcus faced choices that modern Fortune 500 CEOs would consider impossible. Should he debase the currency to fund the military, risking inflation, but ensuring defense? Should he negotiate with barbarian tribes, appearing weak, but saving lives? Should he execute rebellious governors, maintaining order, but destroying trust? These weren't theoretical business school case studies. These were real decisions with immediate, irreversible consequences. When Marcus chose to raise taxes in one province to fund infrastructure in another, real families would struggle to pay. When he decided to move legions from one frontier to another, real soldiers would march hundreds of miles, leaving their families behind. When he appointed a new governor, the lives of millions of citizens would change. The complexity was staggering. Every decision created ripple effects across the empire. A military choice in Germania could affect grain prices in Egypt. A diplomatic agreement with one barbarian tribe could influence the behavior of dozens of others. A legal ruling in Rome could set precedents that would govern provincial courts for centuries. Consider the scope of his daily decisions. Military choices affected 300,000 soldiers across 3 continents. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were men with families, hopes, and fears. Each deployment decision meant some would live and others would die. Each strategic choice could determine whether entire legions returned home victorious or perished in foreign lands. Economic decisions influenced trade routes from Britain to India. When Marcus adjusted taxation policies, he was affecting merchants in London, farmers in Gaul, craftsmen in Syria, and traders in Alexandria. A single policy change could make some regions prosperous while impoverishing others. The emperor had to balance the needs of diverse populations with vastly different cultures, economies, and challenges. Judicial decisions set legal precedents that would govern millions of people for centuries. When Marcus ruled on a complex legal case, he wasn't just resolving a single dispute. He was establishing principles that would guide judges across the empire for generations. His interpretation of law would affect how contracts were enforced, how property rights were protected, and how justice was administered long after his death. Diplomatic decisions could start or end wars that would reshape the known world. A single miscalculation in negotiations could trigger conflicts that would cost billions in today's money and hundreds of thousands of lives. The wrong response to a diplomatic insult could destabilize entire regions. The right agreement could secure peace for decades. The psychological burden was crushing. Modern research shows that executives making high-stakes decisions experience stress levels comparable to combat soldiers. Their cortisol levels spike. Their sleep suffers. Their judgment deteriorates. Many develop decision fatigue, where the quality of their choices degrades throughout the day. But Marcus faced something far more intense than modern executive stress. He was making decisions that affected more people than any human in history. The Roman Empire at its peak under Marcus controlled the lives and fortunes of 60 million people. That's equivalent to running a corporation with more employees than the populations of most modern countries. The isolation was profound. When you're the final decision maker for an empire, there's no one to share the burden with, no board of directors to distribute responsibility, no partners to blame if things go wrong. Every major choice ultimately rested on Marcus's shoulders alone. Yet historical records show that Marcus faced decisions that were literally life and death for millions of people. Yet he remained calm, clear, and consistent. His secret was philosophical preparation. While other leaders relied on gut instinct or political calculation, Marcus had trained his mind to approach every decision through the lens of Stoic philosophy. This wasn't abstract theorizing. This was practical methodology designed to produce optimal outcomes under extreme pressure. Marcus understood that the quality of his decisions would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of civilization itself. He couldn't afford to make choices based on emotion, ego, or political expediency. He needed a system that would consistently guide him toward the best possible outcomes. He understood something that modern neuroscience has now proven. The quality of your decisions isn't determined by your intelligence or experience. It's determined by the framework you use to process information and evaluate options. Most people make decisions reactively, driven by emotion, social pressure, or immediate consequences. Marcus made decisions systematically, using a process that eliminated bias, reduced stress, and consistently produced optimal outcomes. Recent studies at Stanford and Harvard have confirmed what Marcus intuited 2,000 years ago. Decision-making quality correlates more strongly with systematic thinking than with raw intelligence. People with average IQs who use structured decision frameworks consistently outperform geniuses who rely on intuition alone. The framework provides cognitive scaffolding that prevents common errors and ensures important factors aren't overlooked. This explains why some of the most successful entrepreneurs aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room. They're the ones who have developed systematic approaches to complex choices. They've learned to separate emotion from analysis, to consider multiple perspectives, and to think through consequences before acting. They've built decision-making systems that work regardless of their mood, energy level, or external pressure. The foundation of Marcus's decision-making was the Stoic understanding of control. Before evaluating any choice, he would ask himself a fundamental question. What aspects of this situation are within my control, and what aspects are not? This simple distinction revolutionized how he approached leadership. This wasn't just philosophical musing. This was practical psychology. When you clearly distinguish between controllable and uncontrollable factors, you immediately reduce stress and increase effectiveness. Stress comes from trying to control things beyond your influence. Effectiveness comes from focusing your energy where you can actually make a difference. Most leaders waste enormous mental energy trying to control things beyond their influence. They worry about competitor actions, market conditions, or public opinion. They spend hours strategizing about factors they can't affect while neglecting areas where they have real power. This scattered focus leads to poor decisions and chronic stress. Marcus focused exclusively on what he could actually affect: his own thoughts, his own actions, and his own responses to external events. He couldn't control whether barbarian tribes would attack, but he could control how Rome prepared for and responded to attacks. He couldn't control whether plague would strike the empire, but he could control how imperial resources were deployed to minimize suffering. This wasn't passive acceptance. This was strategic clarity. By identifying exactly what he could and couldn't control, Marcus could direct his full attention and resources toward the areas where he could make a real difference, while his competitors exhausted themselves fighting unwinnable battles. Marcus concentrated his power where it mattered most. The psychological benefits were enormous. When you stop trying to control uncontrollable factors, you eliminate a major source of anxiety and frustration. When you focus on controllable elements, you build confidence through effective action. This creates a positive feedback loop where better decisions lead to better outcomes, which lead to greater confidence and even better decisions. The three disciplines of Stoicism became his decision-making foundation. The discipline of perception taught him to see situations clearly, without emotional distortion or wishful thinking. This meant questioning his initial reactions, seeking multiple perspectives, and distinguishing between facts and interpretations. The discipline of action guided him to choose responses that aligned with virtue and long-term benefit, not just immediate advantage or political expediency. The discipline of will helped him accept outcomes beyond his control while maintaining commitment to his principles, preventing regret and second-guessing from undermining future decisions. These disciplines work together to create a comprehensive approach to choice. Perception ensured he understood the situation accurately. Action ensured he responded optimally. Will ensured he remained psychologically resilient regardless of outcomes. This integration of clear thinking, virtuous action, and emotional resilience created a decision-making capability that was virtually unshakable. But Marcus went beyond basic Stoic principles. He developed a systematic framework that could be applied to any decision, from personal choices to imperial policy. This framework became known as the Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix, and it's still used by successful leaders today. What makes it so powerful is its universality. The same process that helped Marcus decide whether to go to war also helped him choose advisors, allocate resources, and resolve legal disputes. The framework is both simple enough to remember under pressure and sophisticated enough to handle the most complex situations. It doesn't require special training or advanced education. It doesn't depend on having perfect information or unlimited time. It works with whatever resources you have available, in whatever circumstances you face. The decision matrix consists of 6 levels, each designed to filter out poor choices and highlight optimal decisions. Think of it as a series of screens that catch bad options before they can cause damage, while allowing the best choices to rise to the surface. Each level builds on the previous one, creating a comprehensive analysis that considers all relevant factors while maintaining focus on what matters most. The beauty of this system is that it prevents the most common decision-making errors: emotional reactions, cognitive biases, incomplete analysis, poor implementation, and psychological attachment to outcomes. By working through each level systematically, you eliminate these sources of error while building confidence in your final choice. Level 1 is the perception filter. Before making any decision, Marcus would ask himself whether he was dealing with an actual problem or just his interpretation of events. Most business crises aren't real crises. They're emotional reactions to normal challenges. By questioning his initial perception, Marcus could often dissolve problems that existed only in his mind. This level addresses one of the most common sources of poor decisions: reacting to our interpretation of events rather than the events themselves. Our brains are constantly creating stories about what's happening around us, and these stories are heavily influenced by our emotions, past experiences, and cognitive biases. What we think is happening often differs significantly from what's actually happening. Marcus trained himself to pause and examine his initial reactions. When he felt anger, he would ask whether the situation truly warranted anger, or whether he was simply interpreting neutral events through an emotional lens. When he felt fear, he would question whether there was real danger, or whether he was catastrophizing normal uncertainty. When he felt excitement, he would consider whether he was seeing genuine opportunity or just wishful thinking. For example, when news arrived that a provincial governor was criticizing imperial policy, Marcus's first instinct might be anger or concern about rebellion. But the perception filter forced him to examine the facts objectively. Was this actually criticism, or was it constructive feedback? Was it a sign of disloyalty or evidence of independent thinking? Was the governor trying to undermine imperial authority, or was he trying to improve imperial effectiveness? Often, what appeared to be a problem was actually an opportunity for improvement. The governor's feedback might reveal flaws in imperial policy that needed correction. His willingness to speak honestly might indicate the kind of independent thinking that made him valuable as a leader. His criticism might actually demonstrate loyalty to the empire's long-term interest rather than disloyalty to the emperor's ego. By applying the perception filter, Marcus could respond to the reality of the situation rather than his emotional interpretation of it. This prevented countless unnecessary conflicts and allowed him to turn potential problems into actual solutions. Instead of punishing honest feedback, he could reward it. Instead of suppressing independent thinking, he could encourage it. The perception filter also helped Marcus recognize when his advisors were reacting emotionally rather than analytically. When generals demanded immediate military action, he could assess whether they were responding to genuine strategic necessity or just their own frustration and desire for action. When economic advisors warned of disaster, he could evaluate whether they were identifying real problems or just expressing their natural tendency toward pessimism. Level 2 is the control assessment. Once Marcus confirmed that a real decision was needed, he would systematically identify which aspects of the situation he could influence and which he could not. This prevented him from wasting time and energy on factors beyond his reach, while ensuring he addressed everything within his power. This level requires brutal honesty about the limits of your influence. Most leaders overestimate their control over external factors while underestimating their control over internal factors. They spend enormous energy trying to control market conditions, competitor actions, or customer behavior while neglecting areas where they have real power, their own preparation, their team's capabilities, their strategic positioning, and their response to external events. Marcus developed a systematic approach to this assessment. He would list all the factors affecting a situation, then categorize them into 3 groups: completely controllable, partially controllable, and completely uncontrollable. Completely controllable factors included his own decisions, actions, and responses. Partially controllable factors included things he could influence but not determine, like the loyalty of his generals or the effectiveness of his policies. Completely uncontrollable factors included things like weather, disease, or the actions of foreign enemies. This categorization allowed him to allocate his attention and resources optimally. He would focus most of his energy on completely controllable factors, where his efforts would have maximum impact. He would invest moderate energy in partially controllable factors, where his influence could make a meaningful difference. He would spend minimal energy on completely uncontrollable factors, accepting them as constraints to work within rather than problems to solve. During the Antonine Plague, Marcus couldn't control the disease itself, but he could control the empire's response. He couldn't prevent deaths, but he could ensure medical resources reached affected areas. He couldn't stop economic disruption, but he could adjust policies to minimize suffering. He couldn't eliminate fear among the population, but he could provide clear communication and visible leadership to maintain confidence. By focusing on controllable factors, he turned a devastating crisis into an opportunity to strengthen imperial institutions. The plague response revealed which administrators were competent and which were not, allowing him to improve the quality of imperial governance. The economic disruption forced innovation in taxation and resource allocation that made the empire more resilient. The social stress tested and strengthened the bonds between different parts of the empire. The control assessment also prevented Marcus from falling into the trap of learned helplessness. When facing overwhelming challenges, it's easy to feel that nothing you do will matter. By systematically identifying areas where you do have control, you maintain agency and effectiveness even in difficult circumstances. You focus on what you can do rather than lamenting what you can't do. Level 3 is the virtue check. Every potential decision was evaluated against the 4 cardinal virtues of Stoicism: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Would this choice demonstrate practical wisdom by considering long-term consequences? Would it serve justice by treating all parties fairly? Would it require courage to do what's right despite opposition? Would it show temperance by avoiding excess or extremes? This wasn't abstract philosophy. It was practical decision-making based on 2,000 years of human experience. Virtue-based choices consistently produce better outcomes because they aligned with fundamental human values and natural law. Decisions that violated virtue might provide short-term benefits, but they always created long-term problems. The wisdom check forced Marcus to think beyond immediate consequences. Would this decision create precedents he could live with? Would it strengthen or weaken the institutions he was trying to build? Would it move the empire toward its long-term goals or away from them? Wisdom meant considering not just what would happen next month, but what would happen next decade. The justice check ensured that decisions served the common good, not just Marcus's personal interest or the interests of powerful elites. Would this choice benefit all citizens or just a privileged few? Would it treat people according to their merit and contribution or according to their political connections? Justice meant making decisions that strengthened the social fabric rather than tearing it apart. The courage check identified whether Marcus was avoiding necessary but difficult decisions out of fear or comfort. Was he choosing the easy path when the right path required confrontation? Was he maintaining the status quo when change was needed? Courage meant doing what was right even when it was politically costly or personally uncomfortable. The temperance check prevented excess and extremism in either direction. Was he overreacting to problems or underreacting to them? Was he being too aggressive or too passive? Was he spending too much or too little? Temperance meant finding the optimal balance point that would produce sustainable results. When Marcus faced pressure to execute prisoners of war to intimidate enemies, the virtue check revealed this would violate justice and wisdom. Cruel treatment might provide temporary deterrence, but it would also inspire greater resistance and damage Rome's reputation. The justice check showed that executing prisoners violated their basic human dignity. The wisdom check revealed that cruelty would create more enemies than it eliminated. Instead, he chose to treat prisoners with dignity, which actually strengthened Rome's position by encouraging enemy surrenders. Warriors who knew they would be treated fairly if captured were more likely to surrender when facing defeat. This reduced casualties on both sides and made future conflicts less costly. The virtue-based decision produced better practical results than the expedient alternative. The virtue check also helped Marcus maintain consistency in his decision-making. When you base choices on unchanging principles rather than changing circumstances, you build a reputation for reliability and integrity. People know what to expect from you, which makes it easier to build trust and cooperation. Virtue-based leadership creates predictability in an unpredictable world. Level 4 is the consequence analysis. Marcus would systematically think through the second and third order effects of each potential decision. Most leaders focus only on immediate results, but Marcus understood that every choice creates ripple effects that can be more important than the initial impact. This level requires what modern systems theorists call second-order thinking. Instead of just asking, "What will happen if I do this?" you ask, "What will happen after that happens?" and "What will happen after that?" This recursive analysis reveals consequences that aren't immediately obvious, but can be more significant than the direct effects of your decision. Marcus developed a systematic approach to consequence analysis. He would map out the immediate stakeholders affected by a decision, then consider how their responses would affect other stakeholders and how those responses would create further effects. This created a web of consequences that helped him anticipate problems and opportunities that other leaders missed. He also considered different time horizons. What would happen in the next month, the next year, the next decade? Some consequences appear quickly while others take years to manifest. A decision that looks brilliant in the short term might prove disastrous in the long term, while a decision that seems costly initially might create enormous benefits over time. Consider his decision about currency debasement during the Marcomannic Wars. The immediate consequence would be increased funding for the military. The second-order effect would be inflation affecting all citizens. The third-order effect would be reduced trust in Roman currency, potentially destabilizing trade relationships across the empire. The fourth-order effect would be economic instability that could outlast the war itself. By thinking through these layers, Marcus could choose policies that achieved his goals without creating bigger problems. Instead of simply debasing the currency, he might choose to raise taxes on luxury goods, which would fund the military while actually strengthening the currency. Or he might choose to issue bonds backed by future tax revenue, spreading the cost over time rather than creating immediate inflation. The consequence analysis also helped Marcus identify unintended benefits of difficult decisions. When he chose to spend heavily on infrastructure during an economic downturn, the immediate consequence was increased government debt. But the second-order effect was job creation that stimulated the economy. The third-order effect was improved transportation that increased trade efficiency. The fourth-order effect was economic growth that more than paid for the initial investment. This level of analysis prevented Marcus from falling into the trap of linear thinking. Most people assume that good intentions lead to good outcomes and bad intentions lead to bad outcomes. But complex systems don't work that way. Well-intentioned decisions can create terrible consequences if you don't think through the ripple effects. Conversely, decisions that seem harsh or costly in the short term might be the most compassionate choice in the long term. Level 5 is the implementation plan. Once Marcus identified the optimal decision, he would develop a detailed strategy for execution. The best choice in the world is worthless without effective implementation. This level focused on practical questions. Who would carry out the decision? What resources were needed? What obstacles might arise? How would progress be measured? This level transformed abstract decisions into concrete action plans. Marcus understood that the gap between decision and execution is where most good ideas die. Without systematic implementation planning, even brilliant strategies remain theoretical exercises that never create real-world impact. Marcus would begin by identifying all the people who needed to be involved in executing the decision. Who had the authority to make it happen? Who had the expertise to do it well? Who had the resources to support it? Who might resist it and need to be convinced? He would map out the human infrastructure required for success. Next, he would sequence the implementation steps. What needed to happen first? What could happen simultaneously? What had to wait for other steps to be completed? He would create a logical flow that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. Complex decisions often required coordinated action across multiple departments or regions, so sequencing was crucial. Resource allocation was another critical component. What financial resources were needed? What materials or equipment? What information or expertise? Marcus would ensure that all necessary resources were identified and secured before implementation began. Nothing kills a good plan faster than discovering halfway through that you lack essential resources. Marcus understood that implementation often determines whether a good decision produces good results. He would assign specific responsibilities, establish clear timelines, and create accountability mechanisms. Each person involved would know exactly what they were responsible for, when it needed to be completed, and how success would be measured. This clarity prevented confusion and ensured coordinated action. He also planned for contingencies, recognizing that even the best plans might need adjustment as circumstances changed. What could go wrong? How would they know if something was going wrong? What alternative approaches could they use if the primary plan failed? This contingency planning allowed rapid adaptation without abandoning the overall strategy. Communication was a crucial element of implementation planning. Who needed to know about the decision? When should they be informed? How should the information be communicated? Marcus understood that poor communication could undermine even the best decisions, so he planned communication strategies as carefully as he planned operational strategies. Level 6 is the acceptance protocol. This final level prepared Marcus to handle outcomes beyond his control. Even perfect decisions can produce unexpected results due to factors no one could predict. The acceptance protocol ensured that Marcus wouldn't waste energy on regret or second-guessing when external forces affected his plans. This wasn't fatalism. It was psychological resilience. By accepting that he couldn't control every outcome, Marcus freed himself to focus on making the next decision rather than dwelling on the last one. This mental clarity was crucial for a leader who faced dozens of major choices every day. The acceptance protocol had several components. First, Marcus would explicitly acknowledge the factors that could affect outcomes, but were beyond his control. This mental preparation reduced the shock and disappointment when unexpected events occurred. Second, he would commit to learning from whatever happened, regardless of whether it matched his expectations. Every outcome provided information that could improve future decisions. Third, he would maintain perspective by remembering that individual decisions were part of a larger pattern. One bad outcome didn't invalidate his decision-making process any more than one good outcome proved it was perfect. What mattered was the long-term quality of his choices, not the short-term results of any single decision. Finally, he would prepare emotionally to move forward regardless of outcomes. Success wouldn't make him overconfident. Failure wouldn't make him doubt his process. He would remain psychologically balanced and ready to apply the same systematic approach to the next decision. Let's examine how Marcus applied this framework to one of his most challenging decisions, the Avidius-Cassius Rebellion in 175 A.D. Cassius, one of Marcus's most trusted generals, declared himself emperor and seized control of the eastern provinces. This was the ultimate betrayal, threatening to split the empire in half. The situation was devastating on multiple levels. Cassius controlled some of the empire's wealthiest provinces, including Egypt, which supplied much of Rome's grain. He commanded experienced legions that had served under him for years and were personally loyal to him. He had the support of several provincial governors who believed Marcus was dead. The rebellion threatened to trigger a civil war that could destroy everything Marcus had worked to build. Marcus's initial emotional response was probably anger, hurt, and the desire for immediate military action. Any normal leader would have mobilized every available legion and marched east to crush the rebellion as quickly as possible. The political pressure to respond with overwhelming force was enormous. Marcus's advisors were demanding blood. His remaining generals were questioning his strength if he didn't act decisively. But he applied the decision matrix systematically. The perception filter helped him see that Cassius might genuinely believe Marcus was dead, as rumors suggested. Reports from the eastern provinces indicated that news of Marcus's death during the Germanic campaigns had reached Syria before accurate information about his survival. From Cassius's perspective, he might be acting to prevent imperial collapse rather than pursuing personal ambition. This reframing changed everything. Instead of seeing pure treachery, Marcus could see a complex situation where good intentions had led to terrible consequences. Instead of focusing on punishment, he could focus on resolution. Instead of assuming the worst about Cassius's motives, he could consider multiple explanations for his actions. The control assessment identified what Marcus could influence: his own response, the loyalty of his remaining forces, and the information available to other provinces. He couldn't control Cassius's actions or the loyalty of the Eastern legions, but he could control how he responded to the crisis. He could ensure that accurate information reached all parts of the empire. He could demonstrate his continued leadership through decisive but measured action. The virtue check revealed that immediate military action might be justified, but could also devastate the eastern provinces and kill thousands of innocent people. The wisdom check showed that civil war would set a terrible precedent for future succession disputes. The justice check revealed that many of Cassius's supporters were acting on incomplete information rather than malicious intent. The courage check demanded that Marcus do what was right for the empire, not what was politically expedient. The temperance check warned against both excessive force and excessive mercy. The consequence analysis showed that civil war would weaken the entire empire, making it vulnerable to external enemies. The immediate consequence of military action would be the defeat of Cassius's forces. The second-order effect would be massive casualties and economic disruption in the eastern provinces. The third-order effect would be resentment and instability that could last for generations. The fourth-order effect would be a weakened empire that barbarian tribes and foreign enemies could exploit. The implementation plan focused on rapid communication to prove Marcus was alive and diplomatic outreach to Cassius's supporters. Marcus would send trusted messengers to every major city in the empire, carrying letters in his own handwriting and bearing his personal seal. He would offer amnesty to anyone who had supported Cassius based on false information about his death. He would demonstrate his continued leadership by maintaining his campaign schedule while addressing the crisis. The acceptance protocol prepared Marcus for the possibility that Cassius might refuse to surrender, requiring military action despite its costs. Marcus accepted that he couldn't control Cassius's response to his diplomatic overtures. He prepared mentally for the possibility that civil war might be unavoidable, but he also prepared for the possibility that the crisis could be resolved peacefully, which would actually strengthen the empire by demonstrating the power of mercy and wisdom over force. As it happened, Cassius was killed by his own men before Marcus arrived, but the framework had prepared him for any outcome while minimizing damage to the empire. Marcus's measured response had prevented a devastating civil war while maintaining imperial unity. His willingness to consider Cassius's perspective had preserved the loyalty of the eastern provinces. His systematic approach had turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of imperial strength and wisdom. Modern business leaders face decisions that echo Marcus's challenges. Startup founders must decide when to pivot their business model, risking everything they've built but potentially saving the company. CEOs must choose between short-term profits and long-term sustainability, balancing shareholder demands with strategic vision. Entrepreneurs must decide whether to accept investment offers that provide capital but reduce control. The Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix works just as well for these modern challenges. Take the decision to pivot a startup. The perception filter asks whether poor performance indicates a fundamental problem or just normal growing pains. The control assessment identifies which aspects of the business model can be changed and which market conditions must be accepted. The virtue check evaluates whether pivoting serves the long-term interests of customers, employees, and investors, not just the founder's ego. The consequence analysis considers how a pivot might affect team morale, investor confidence, and competitive position. The implementation plan details how to execute the change while minimizing disruption. The acceptance protocol prepares for the possibility that even a well-executed pivot might not succeed due to factors beyond the founder's control. Consider hiring and firing decisions, which every leader faces. The perception filter distinguishes between performance problems and personality conflicts. The control assessment identifies which aspects of employee performance can be influenced through training, feedback, or environmental changes. The virtue check ensures that personnel decisions serve justice and the organization's mission, not personal preferences or political considerations. The consequence analysis considers how hiring or firing decisions affect team dynamics, company culture, and organizational capability. The implementation plan details how to onboard new employees or transition departing ones while maintaining productivity and morale. The acceptance protocol prepares for the reality that even good hiring decisions sometimes don't work out due to unforeseen circumstances. Investment decisions also benefit from this systematic approach. The perception filter helps distinguish between genuine opportunities and emotional reactions to market movements. The control assessment identifies which factors affecting the investment can be influenced and which must be accepted as market risks. The virtue check ensures that investment choices align with long-term values and fiduciary responsibilities. The consequence analysis considers how investment decisions affect portfolio balance, risk exposure, and future opportunities. The implementation plan details timing, position sizing, and exit strategies. The acceptance protocol prepares for the reality that even well-researched investments can lose money due to unpredictable market forces. Crisis management represents perhaps the most challenging application of the decision matrix. When facing unexpected disasters, most leaders react emotionally, making hasty decisions that often make situations worse. The systematic approach Marcus developed helps maintain clarity and effectiveness, even under extreme pressure. During the 2008 financial crisis, leaders who applied similar frameworks to Marcus's often outperformed those who relied on intuition or conventional wisdom. They focused on factors within their control rather than panicking about market conditions. They made decisions based on long-term principles rather than short-term fear. They planned implementation carefully rather than taking desperate actions. They accepted that some losses were inevitable while positioning for eventual recovery. Partnership and acquisition decisions require particularly careful analysis because they involve complex relationships and long-term commitments. The perception filter helps distinguish between strategic opportunities and ego-driven empire building. The control assessment identifies which aspects of potential partnerships can be structured favorably and which risks must be accepted. The virtue check ensures that partnership decisions serve all stakeholders fairly and align with organizational values. The consequence analysis considers how partnerships might affect company culture, competitive position, and strategic flexibility. The implementation plan details integration processes, governance structures, and success metrics. The acceptance protocol prepares for the possibility that even well-structured partnerships might not achieve expected synergies. The beauty of Marcus's system is that it becomes more effective with practice. Each time you apply the decision matrix, you strengthen your ability to think systematically under pressure. You develop pattern recognition that helped you spot potential problems earlier. You build confidence in your decision-making process, which reduces stress and improves judgment. Marcus developed daily practices that supported his decision-making framework. Every morning, he would spend time in reflection, preparing his mind for the choices ahead. He would review his principles, remind himself of what he could and couldn't control, and set intentions for how he wanted to respond to challenges. Throughout the day, he would pause before major decisions to work through the matrix systematically. This wasn't time-consuming. With practice, the framework becomes almost automatic, allowing rapid but thorough analysis of complex situations. The key is building the habit of systematic thinking rather than reactive decision-making. In the evening, Marcus would review the day's decisions, not to second-guess himself, but to learn from outcomes and refine his process. He would note which decisions produced expected results and which led to surprises. He would identify patterns in his thinking and areas for improvement. This continuous learning loop made him increasingly effective over time. Emergency situations require a compressed version of the decision matrix. When facing time pressure, Marcus would focus on the most critical elements, a rapid control assessment to identify immediate options, a quick virtue check to ensure the response aligned with principles, a basic consequence analysis to avoid obvious mistakes, a simple implementation plan focused on immediate actions. Even under extreme time pressure, this systematic approach produced better results than purely intuitive responses. The framework provided structure that prevented panic while ensuring that important factors weren't overlooked. It also built confidence, allowing Marcus to act decisively even when facing unprecedented challenges. Documentation played a crucial role in Marcus's decision-making process. He would record the reasoning behind major choices, not for justification, but for learning. By tracking the logic that led to each decision, he could identify patterns in his thinking and improve his process over time. This documentation also helped him avoid repeating mistakes. When facing similar situations in the future, he could reference previous decisions and their outcomes. This created a personal database of experience that enhanced his judgment and reduced the likelihood of errors. Building decision-making muscle requires deliberate practice. Start by applying the matrix to low-stakes choices to develop familiarity with the process. Practice identifying what you can and cannot control in everyday situations. Work on seeing situations clearly without emotional distortion. Develop the habit of considering long-term consequences before acting. As you become more comfortable with the framework, apply it to increasingly important decisions. Notice how systematic thinking affects your confidence and stress levels. Pay attention to how your decisions improve when you follow the process consistently. Track outcomes to identify areas where your judgment can be refined. The compound effect of better decision-making cannot be overstated. Every choice you make influences future options and outcomes. Small improvements in decision quality create exponential improvements in results over time. Leaders who consistently make slightly better choices eventually achieve dramatically better outcomes than those who rely on intuition alone. Marcus understood that decision-making was perhaps the most important skill a leader could develop. Everything else, strategy, execution, relationships, depends on the quality of the choices you make. By developing a systematic approach to decision-making, you create a sustainable competitive advantage that compounds over time. The Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix isn't just a business tool. It's a life philosophy that can improve every aspect of your existence. Whether you're choosing a career path, making investment decisions, or navigating personal relationships, the same principles apply. Clear perception, focus on what you can control, alignment with virtue, consideration of consequences, careful implementation, and acceptance of outcomes beyond your influence. This framework has guided successful leaders for nearly 2,000 years. Because it's based on fundamental truths about human nature and effective decision-making. It works regardless of the specific challenges you face because it addresses the underlying structure of choice itself. As you begin applying this system, remember that mastery takes time. Marcus spent decades refining his approach, learning from both successes and failures. Be patient with yourself as you develop these skills. Focus on consistency rather than perfection. The goal isn't to make perfect decisions, but to make systematically better ones. Start today with your next important choice. Work through each level of the matrix deliberately. Notice how the process affects your confidence and clarity. Pay attention to how systematic thinking changes your perspective on the decision. Track the outcome and learn from the experience. Over time, you'll find that decision-making becomes less stressful and more effective. You'll develop the same kind of calm confidence that allowed Marcus Aurelius to lead the world's largest organization through unprecedented challenges. You'll build the decision-making muscle that separates great leaders from merely good ones. The Emperor's Decision Matrix awaits your application. The same framework that guided the most successful leader in human history through impossible choices is now yours to use. The question isn't whether it works. History has proven its effectiveness. The question is whether you'll have the discipline to apply it consistently. Your next great decision starts now. Remember, this isn't just about making better business choices. This is about developing the mental clarity and systematic thinking that separates extraordinary leaders from ordinary ones. Marcus Aurelius didn't become the greatest leader in history by accident. He developed systems and frameworks that consistently produced optimal outcomes, even under impossible pressure. The decision matrix you've learned today represents 2,000 years of proven leadership wisdom, refined by one of history's most successful rulers and validated by modern neuroscience. It's not theory, it's practical methodology that works in the real world, under real pressure with real consequences. Every successful entrepreneur I know has some version of this systematic approach to decision-making. They might not call it the Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix, but they all understand the importance of clear perception, focus on controllable factors, alignment with principles, consideration of consequences, careful implementation, and acceptance of outcomes. The difference between those who succeed and those who struggle often comes down to decision quality, not intelligence, not resources, not luck. The ability to consistently make better choices than your competitors. The framework you've learned today gives you that ability. But knowledge without application is worthless. The most sophisticated decision-making system in the world won't help you if you don't use it. Starting tomorrow, begin applying this framework to every significant choice you face. Make it a habit. Make it automatic. Make it part of who you are as a leader. Track your results. Notice how your stress levels change when you approach decisions systematically rather than reactively. Pay attention to how your confidence improves when you know you've thoroughly analyzed a situation. Observe how your outcomes improve when you consistently apply proven principles. Within 90 days of consistent application, you'll notice a fundamental shift in how you approach leadership challenges. Within a year, you'll have developed the kind of decision-making capability that sets you apart from 99% of other entrepreneurs. Within 5 years, you'll have built the systematic thinking skills that create lasting competitive advantage. This is how empires are built, not through luck or genius, but through the disciplined application of proven principles. Marcus Aurelius understood this. The most successful modern leaders understand this. Now, you understand it too. The question is what you'll do with this knowledge. Will you file it away as interesting information, or will you transform it into practical capability? Will you let it inspire you for a few days, or will you use it to revolutionize how you approach every important decision for the rest of your career? The choice, as always, is yours. But now, you have the framework to make that choice systematically, confidently, and effectively. The same framework that guided the most successful leader in human history through impossible decisions is now yours to use. Your empire awaits. Your legacy depends on the choices you make. And now you have the tools to make those choices with the wisdom of emperors. The Marcus Aurelius Decision Matrix. Master it, apply it, and watch as your leadership transforms from reactive to systematic, from stressful to confident, from good to extraordinary. This is how you build wealth like an emperor. This is how you lead like a philosopher. This is how you make decisions that create lasting impact. The framework is yours. The application is up to you. Your next great decision starts now.